In the 1990s, O Neill became an activist for social justice and feminist causes, serving terms as president of Maryland Now, Louisiana Now, and New Orleans Now. She has twice been a member of the Now National Board and its vice president, serving with another Now president with Louisiana roots, Kim Gandy. She's also overseen Now national programs in membership development, finance, and government relations. The membership of Now elected O Neill president in 2009 in one of many highly contested elections which chartered the future course of the organization. I've been a member of the National Organization for Women since the 1970s and studied its role most importantly in advocating for gender fairness in the courts and in the appointment of women judges. Unlike the trend to what Heidi Hartman has labeled flea market feminism, where every feminist puts out her own stall, or flagpole feminism, where someone tries out a particular cause and see who salutes, the National Organization for Women has been one of the few generalist feminist organizations that retains a commitment to grassroots membership base, in sharp contrast to what Robert Putnam has derided as the trend towards checkbook activism. Over the last 2 years, I've developed an even greater appreciation of those willing to lead feminist organizations, particularly leaders with as clear a vision and commitment to social justice as Terry O Neill. Feminist organizations are harder on leaders than most social change organizations. But along with my greater appreciation of the courage and perhaps foolhardiness of those willing to lead such difficult and unwieldy social movement organizations is an even deeper gratitude to those willing to put themselves on the front line for women in these mean-spirited and dangerous times where being pro-choice can be a death sentence. Louisiana does not first spring to mind as the easiest place to call oneself a feminist, nor the most obvious training ground for nurturing feminist talent. So we are especially proud, Terry, to have you as our national representative and grateful for the time you've taken over the last few days to be on our campus. Before we welcome Terry to the stage, I'd like us to acknowledge the hard work of Jan Mulvihill in organizing tonight's events, the Newcomb College Institute and its staff, the Women in Politics groups, and Vox, two of our new student groups. Now please join me in welcoming a woman whose unrelenting efforts to achieve the simple idea of equality for women have made a difference in all of our lives. Terry O Neill.
Thank you. All right. Well, I hope you all can see me. I'm not the tallest person in the world. Sally, thank you so much, first for that lovely introduction, and really for all of the work that you do at the Newcomb College Institute, and the work that you're planning to do, that you and I have talked about a little bit. It's just wonderful. I also want to extend a huge thanks to my dear friend, Professor Claire Dickerson, for her hospitality and for helping make this a really easy, fun, wonderful trip. I want to thank my colleagues and friends at New Orleans Now. I see Connie Phelps is here, and the president of New Orleans Now, Charlotte Klassen, is here. Thank you all for being here. It's really wonderful to see so many friends and colleagues. And I'm going to sort of stand over here. I think I have a mic so you all can hear me. So what I wanted to talk about this evening is, my speech is titled, Women Need Jobs, Not Cuts. I think it's extremely important for us to begin to grapple with the disproportionate impact on women of the national dialogue that's taking place these days about the federal budget and the economy and how we can fix the budget and fix the economy and so forth. It's a very frustrating time right now for me, for many of us in Washington, D.C., because what we see is, let's see if that works. Let's see. Yeah. So, and especially in Washington, and sometimes I think Washington, D.C. is more of a citadel. It's got very, very high walls, and you get this echo chamber effect. What we hear all the time from pundits, from elected officials, from Democrats as well as Republicans, is that there is a deficit crisis. Our country is facing a deficit crisis, and as a result, we must cut spending. Sometimes I feel like, this this is really the nature of the conversation in Washington, D.C. It's not really nuanced. I thought that's kind of the way it feels. So the reality is the country does not have a deficit crisis, right? What we have is a long-term deficit problem that can be fixed, but it requires a long-term solution. The crisis that we have is, in fact, a jobs crisis, right? And I think what is not sufficiently known or talked about is that women are disproportionately affected by the current jobs crisis. So, for example, since the Great Recession ended, that was in June or July of 2009, women have actually lost, on net, over 325,000 jobs. Right? In that same time period, since the recovery began, men have gained well over 800,000 jobs. I don't have the exact number, but that's the gap. Clearly, men have not gained the number of jobs that they lost. We need to do a lot better with that. But women today are continuing to lose jobs. In fact, when I put together these numbers, in February, the number of jobs, net jobs that women had lost was at 257,000, something like that. By the end of the summer of 2011, the job loss for women on net has grown to 325,000, and we're still losing jobs, right? One of the main reasons for that, of course, is that women are overrepresented in public sector jobs, right? State government, local government, and again, something that we don't necessarily focus on. If you all remember, back in the 1990s, there was this effort to reinvent government. And the idea was that the United States government had gotten too big and we had to shrink the payrolls and shrink government. Well, a lot of that was done at the state and local level simply by outsourcing a lot of the services that were paid for with taxes, but now were not performed by state employees or county employees, if you will. So, battered women's shelters were outsourced, and family planning clinics were outsourced, and child care services outsourced, and other kinds of services are provided or outsourced to nonprofit organizations. Well, at the state and local level, what's been happening since the recession began was as the states and local governments begin seeing down the road that their property taxes, which is their resource base, is going to go down, so their revenues are going down. So the first wave of layoffs happens at the nonprofit level in states and local communities, and then it starts hitting the state employees, right? We've seen layoffs of teachers, child care workers, health care workers, social workers, and this is what is driving that $325,000 number. Now, so that's bad, but let's put this together with something else. Women have fewer resources to fall back on when they are laid off, right? Due to the persistent wage gap, right? We have less in the way of savings. And here's another little factoid, a statistic that a lot of people don't focus on. And actually, if you do the math in terms of the 77 cents to the dollar that women are paid, what you find is over a lifetime of unequal pay, an average woman will lose $400,000 to the gender wage gap. It fluctuates depending on the industry that you work in and depending on race and geography where you are, but the average loss is $400,000, and who couldn't really use $400,000? That's the savings. That's your sort of nest egg that you fall back on when you get laid off for a few months, or in the case of what's going on currently, for a few years. That's the money that women don't have. Overall, women are paid 77 cents to the dollar, but African American women are paid 69 cents to the dollar, right? And Latinas are paid 59 cents to the dollar. This translates, this wage disparity, and women of color face race-based as well as gender-based wage disparities. What happens here is some astonishing numbers around wealth disparities. And the good news is that someone is actually paying attention and beginning to produce reports about this. The bad news is the information that they found, right? Single African American women's median wealth, that's net worth, assets minus liabilities. Single women, that means unmarried, 18 years old and over, the median wealth is $100 throughout this country, right? For single Latinas, median wealth is $125. What we're talking about is resources, the ability to get through tough times. $125 for single Latinas. Single white women, $41,500. Right? That is a disparity that I think the women's movement has got to wrap its brain around. This is not acceptable. It is not tolerable. And a key component of the women's rights movement, I think, going forward has got to be to take those numbers and dramatically reduce the gap, right? It's just not okay. Now, if you look at contrasting single women's median wealth with couples' median wealth, it's really very interesting. So African American couples' median wealth, $31,500 versus $100 for single women, okay? Latino couples, $18,000. The dramatic difference there appears to be that wealth is mostly tied up in your home and your car, right? And in the Latino community, the dramatic fall off in home values has been a lot more severe just because of the geography of where Latino communities invested in housing. So I think that's the reason for most of the difference. Look at white couples, $165,000 net worth, okay? So we have clearly an enormous amount of work to do. These wealth disparities are not happening by accident. They're happening because this country has policies that are bad policies that need to change, right? In fact, we know that there's a pretty good solution to the overall jobs crisis, and that is, a lot of people have talked about, let's see if I can get this, yes. We really need to rebuild both the physical and the social infrastructure. Again, we don't necessarily, when we talk about jobs, and I hear a lot of proposals to rebuild America, the levees are crumbling, and the bridges, and the roads, and the transit systems. It all needs to be rebuilt. We've got all of this need. Government should put people to work doing these things. And the reality is, yes, that's important. It's very important. But it ignores another reality, which is that the vast majority of workplaces in the United States are severely sex segregated. There's a fascinating statistic that if you look at the 155 job classifications that the Bureau of Labor Statistics recognizes, something like 25 of the, I think it's 500 and some classifications, maybe it's not 155, it's 500 and some classifications, 25 job classifications, in only 25 do you find women at 50% or more represented in those job classifications. That's just an indication of how women cluster in a very small number of job classifications and are very, very widely and thinly dispersed through the other job classifications. Lots of sex segregation in the workplace, which means that if you're rebuilding the roads and the transit and the bridges and the levees, you're not putting women back to work. And women are the ones who have lost on net $325,000 jobs. What do you have to do? You have to pay attention to what I call the social infrastructure, right? That's the nurses and the teachers and the social workers and the home health care workers and the child care workers, the people who do the work that makes work possible, right? So there is a group called the Women's, come on, buddy. Well, let's see if I can. Yes, the Women's Scholars Forum, who made a series of recommendations for what we could do to get women back to work. First is very obvious. Just federal government send money to the state and local governments so that we rehire the teachers, nurses, child care workers, and health care workers that have been laid off, right? And that includes in the nonprofits as well as direct employees. Second, here's another really easy solution. Extend the school day and extend the school year, right? That has two really good outcomes. First, it allows working parents to keep their jobs and to know that their children are safe for a long period of time instead of having latchkey kids. So it helps productivity of working parents, and it helps them keep their jobs. And then, of course, it puts women to work, right? Because most of the people who will be staffing the extended school day and the extended school year would be women. Another proposal is, oh, there we go. An urban conservation corps. That's an area where women as well as men have job opportunities. A very simple home weatherization program. Doesn't have to be very high tech, doesn't have to have a lot of stuff to it. You would hire men and women there. Of course, funding quality childcare is, again, helping working parents keep their jobs and would put primarily women back to work. There we go. Extending unemployment insurance, not just extended for the long-term unemployed and keep their unemployment checks coming, because in this economy they can't get a job, but also extend unemployment insurance to cover people whose hours have been cut back. So from 40 hours to 25 hours or 30 hours. And they could get, the idea is for them to get unemployment insurance benefits to help make up some of that. And then lower the barriers for women, obviously, in non-traditional jobs, where to build the railroads and the bridges and the roads and so forth. While we're at it, of course, it's extremely important to remember that for women, good jobs can often be extremely difficult to find. And what I mean by good jobs are jobs with livable wages, right? Which is not a minimum wage. Jobs that offer equal pay for equal work, and in fact, equal pay for work of equal value. Jobs with pensions, right? Jobs that offer health care. These are the kinds of jobs that we really need to demand. There's at least one, John Boehner, Speaker of the House of Representatives, put out, he distributed a report by the Republican staff of the Joint Economic Committee of the House of Representatives. One of the things that they suggested was that the upside of layoffs of state employees is that it would put a lot of skilled government workers out on the market for jobs. And that would reduce the labor costs of private corporations. So, in other words, in addition to the mantra of fixing the economy by having, lower taxes, less regulation, lower taxes, less regulation, oh, here's something new, and lower wages. That'll fix the economy. That's the whole idea that they're having. If we actually take the idea of jobs seriously, we will not only, here we go. Oh, come on. Yes, if you fix the jobs crisis, you fix the deficit problem, right? Because employed persons, maybe I'm not pointing at them. Yeah, employed people are also known as taxpayers. Yes, thank you. And they're also known as customers, right? The fact is that the private sector is currently sitting on approximately $1 trillion in cash. That is money that is not being invested in staffing up, right? Because if you're the CEO of a private company and you start staffing up, your board will fire you, or should fire you, because there are no customers to buy the products that your company might be selling. So the reason the business is not hiring is that there are no customers on the horizon. We need government now to step in and create employment that will create taxpayers and then customers, and then the private sector will be able to start getting in on the game and start hiring again. You create what Robert Reich has called the virtuous cycle. I don't know how to, maybe. Right? So jobs creates customers and tax revenues, and the tax revenues come in, and tax revenues lower the deficit, right? And once you've lowered the deficit, you begin to draw down the United States debt. So in other words, pay attention to the real crisis, address the real crisis, fix the real crisis, and just by doing so, you've already begun to fix the deficit problem, which is not actually a crisis, but it is it's just a problem. All right, so those of you might recognize this pop culture reference that I'm trying to draw up here. I keep hearing this, you fix, in my circles we say fix the jobs crisis, fix the deficit problem, and I keep hearing in the back of my mind, yes, save the cheerleader, save the world. How many of you recognize that from heroes? Yeah, okay, so somebody has seen that. Anyway, so yeah, we can save the world. So, but unfortunately in the citadel of Washington, D.C., what you hear constantly is there is no jobs crisis. It's not a jobs crisis, it's a deficit crisis. We have to run for the hills. It's a deficit crisis. So what did Washington do most recently in threatening to shut down the government over this debate about the deficit crisis and what the budget should be and so forth? In order to get past the debt deficit conversation, lift the United States debt limit, we had that whole debacle that went on. The compromise that was ultimately reached was to create a deficit reduction super committee, right? The super committee is charged with developing a plan by November 23rd of this year to reduce the federal budget deficit by $1.5 trillion over the next 10 years, right? And if they don't create a plan, there will be automatic cuts in social programs and military spending, right? Now, who is on the super committee? I'm going to leave this up for just a little bit. The deficit committee is 12 individuals, right? So 6 senators, 3 Democrats and 3 Republicans, and 6 House members, 3 Democrats and 3 Republicans, okay? And if they get to a majority vote, 7 out of the 12, if 7 out of the 12 can agree on some kind of a plan to reduce the deficit, right? And mind you, they're not spending their time creating jobs here. Their charge is just to reduce the deficit. If they can get to 7, then their plan will be submitted to both houses of Congress on an up or down vote. No ability to send it to the regular committee process, no ability to make proposed changes, thumbs up or thumbs down on the deficit, so-called deficit reduction plan that these geniuses will come up with. What you need to know is that 6 of these guys, there's 11 men and 1 woman, 6 of these people are already on record voting to do the following: to convert Medicare to a private voucher system, right? And the way the private voucher system would work is you're an individual, you're on Medicare, you get so many dollars in your vouchers every year, and it doesn't matter how sick you get. Once you've used up your vouchers, you're on your own. You have to dip into your own pocket, your family's pocket, to take care of your health issues. Convert Medicare to a private voucher system, number 1. Number 2, convert Medicaid to a block grant problem at the state, a block grant program at the state level, and reduce the federal government's portion of it by 20% over 10 years. Third, change the budget making rules so that Social Security cuts and Social Security benefits would go on a fast track, very hard for Congress to shut down. Fourth, these guys are all on record voting for this, and it passed the House. We were only able to stop it in the Senate, right? The fourth thing is the whole array of social programs that disproportionately serve women and disproportionately employ women at the same time would be drastically cut. So, Head Start, prenatal care, child care programs, tuition assistance, job training for non-traditional occupations, you name it, all kinds of programs drastically cut. Would that reduce the deficit? Well, not exactly, because in the same legislation that these guys all voted for, 6 of them, you had increases in military spending and in enhancements of corporate tax breaks and millionaires' tax breaks. So the total ultimate deficit reduction was actually very small, in a couple $100 billion or something. So not good. 6, all they need to do is peel off 1. That's all they need to do is peel off 1. Now, 535 individuals that we paid good money to in the House of Representatives and the United States Senate have abdicated their jobs to these 12 individuals. So as far as I'm concerned, John Kerry is now my senator, and he is now your senator, okay? And so is Patty Murray, and so is Max Baucus, and Pat Toomey, and Rob Portman, and John Kyle. And we need to write to them all and communicate with all of them and say, you know, you represent me now, and this is what I think, and this is what I want. That's part of the action that we're actually encouraging our supporters and our members to take over the next few weeks. One of the problems that we're having actually is they're operating in such deep secrecy that we really don't know what they're doing. What we do know, we don't have specifics about what we're doing. We do know that they are using the Ryan budget as their baseline. That's what they're starting with because half of them are already on record voting for the Ryan budget. What I just described was the Ryan budget, created by Paul Ryan of Wisconsin. He's the chair of the House Budget Committee, and this is the budget that passed the House, was stopped in the Senate, and ultimately we had a sort of a poor compromise around that. So the frame for the supercommittee's work is the Ryan budget, and it's named after Paul Ryan. We did stop it in the Senate. So here's how it works. And I said this already. Medicare, voucher system, Medicaid becomes block grants. Social Security goes on a fast track for cuts. We have enhanced tax breaks for corporations. Social programs would be cut. And we have the family planning clinics, the prenatal care, Head Start, child care, tuition assistance, other kinds of things. It also increases the military spending, right? Because so these spending cuts are offset by the military spending and then enhanced tax cuts. And what I think people have not sufficiently, certainly in the progressive community, it's really striking to me that they get how devastating this would be to families and to whole communities. But what is not often talked about is how disproportionately harmful they are, specifically to women. So let's talk about one at a time these various things, right, that the Ryan budget will do to us. Why is it disproportionately harmful to women? Okay. There you go. First of all, because they serve women disproportionately, and again, we don't notice this very often, they disproportionately employ women as well. Medicare. So more than half of Medicare beneficiaries are women, right? So we are already disproportionately reliant on Medicare. Among the so-called oldest old, that's 85 years old and over, 70% of Medicaid beneficiaries are women, right? And women are more likely than men to report having 3 or more chronic conditions. So heart disease, diabetes, cancer, high blood pressure, those kinds of things. Women are far more likely than men to have sort of coexisting health needs and therefore higher Medicare costs or higher health care costs. Well, Medicaid, what about Medicaid's impact on women? A lot of people don't know this, but 70% of Medicaid dollars, 70% of Medicaid dollars go for nursing homes and families without regard to means testing. So middle-class families as well as low-income families with a very severe disability, like a child with autism, right? 70%. If Medicaid were to be block granted, as the Ryan budget proposes, hundreds, if not thousands, of nursing homes around the country would close, putting the people who work there out of work and putting the residents out of the nursing homes. Well, the vast majority of residents of nursing homes are women, and the majority of employees of nursing homes are women. So again, the attacks on Medicaid have a decidedly disproportionate impact on women. Well, what about Social Security and women? Women make up 57% of Social Security beneficiaries that are over age 65. A lot of that is because women still live longer than men, and so as they age, you see a much larger proportion of the cohort is women. All right. Social Security provides more than 60% of the total income for women aged 65 and over. For men 65 and over, Social Security is about half their total income. For women, it's about more than 60% of their total income. So Social Security keeps fully 1/3 of women in that 65 to 74 range out of poverty, and more than half of women 75 and over would be living in poverty if not for Social Security. And that's true even though Social Security's benefits are extremely modest, a little less than $11,000 per year for women, about $14,000 per year for men. And yet, just that little bit is enough to keep half of the aging population out of poverty. Right? For African American women, Social Security is even more important. Over half of black women who are 75 years old or older rely on Social Security for 100% of their income. Right? And their monthly check is about $900, a little less than $900. Right? It's absolutely striking. Now, right now, the only proposed cut to the Social Security benefits is actually the COLA, the cost of living adjustment, and the proposal has been to provide a lower cost of living adjustment. The idea is it's more accurate. In fact, it's less accurate for older people, but it's just astonishing. So, your costs are this, and you've got your Social Security money, and your costs go up like this, and your Social Security goes up like this, and it goes up like this, and your Social Security. And so as your annual cost of living actually goes up, your annual cost of living adjustment does not keep pace. And by the time a woman is 90 years old, if this lower cost of living adjustment were enacted, she would be the gap between what the actual increase in her costs and the increase in her Social Security check would be equivalent to about 6 months of food. That's according to the National Women's Law Center. Very long before she turns 90, she starts losing 1 week of food per month with the lower cost of living adjustment. It's really astonishing. As far as the raft of social programs that have been attacked by the Ryan budget, the programs, again, they disproportionately employ women. You're talking about social workers, healthcare workers, child care workers, educators, teachers, and so forth. So the Ryan budget is very disproportionately harmful to women, and yet we have a super committee that 6 of them on that super committee have already started to use this as their base. And I think that what we need to do is advocate loudly and very insistently for a real solution, because the reality is, beyond directly harming women, implementation of the Ryan budget, this austerity program, is more likely than not to cause a second recession in this country very quickly. It will not fix our economic problems, and it will not fix either the federal budget deficit or state and local deficits, because if you drive the economy into another recession, then tax revenues go down. Tax revenues being down is largely what is responsible for the deficit. That and the fact that we have a couple of wars that we're fighting we haven't figured out how to pay for, so we're borrowing the money to pay for those wars. So, what's the solution? We need an aggressive jobs bill. And it's not like we don't have ideas. It's not like there aren't legislators in Washington that are actually putting in good ideas. And the president has put up the American Jobs Act. My organization has not endorsed this bill. We don't think it goes far enough in terms of creating jobs, and more importantly, there's a few aspects of it that we think are very, very troublesome, but we have not opposed it. What we want is for Congress to take up the bill and consider it. It does provide, it prevents the layoffs of 280,000 teachers. It's got some other good things in there. It's got some very worrisome things. What we want is for Congress to take it up, and then hopefully some progressive amendments could be made, and at least we would have a national conversation about those amendments and about the direction the country should be taking. Frankly, a much better jobs bill has been drafted by Jan Schakowsky, a congresswoman from Chicago. She would create 2.2 million jobs over the next 2 years. Jobs that are very well balanced between jobs where male employees predominate and jobs where female employees predominate. She pays for it with a tax on millionaires. It's really not all that complicated, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. We also need to, while we're creating jobs, strengthen wage replacement programs like unemployment insurance to cover underemployment, as well as unemployment, so for long-term unemployed people and shorter hours. We really need to enhance Social Security benefits. That you put money into the pocket of Social Security beneficiaries who rely on Social Security, those people will spend the money. Spending the money is what will start getting customers, and the business cycle might actually rejuvenate. So we need to get more money in the hands of Social Security beneficiaries. In particular, we really need a caregiver credit for women. Your Social Security benefit, one of the main reasons the women's benefits are so much lower is that women drop out of the workforce. And yet the Social Security benefit is calculated on the basis of 35 years of working. And during those years that you don't work for pay, you've taken time off to care for children or for elders or for ill family members, when you're not getting an actual wage, the Social Security system counts your wage as zero, right? So it's 0, 0, 0, 0. In fact, on average, women work 27 years during their lifetime, not 35. And as a result of all those zeros, the averaging out drastically lowers the benefit that they get. So the proposal is really very simple. You plug in a number. For the years that women have dropped out of the workforce to engage in caregiving, you put $20,000 in there as a placeholder. So the calculation of the benefit is whatever, 20, whatever, 20, whatever, right? It's really very simple. It would enhance Social Security and be a lot more fair in terms of the kinds of contributions that women make to our communities. We don't always get cash payment for it, but it doesn't mean that it's not an important and valuable contribution. We also need to increase the benefits for the oldest old and the poorest poor. You know, study after study shows women as they age, you ask them what is the thing they are most afraid of, and the vast majority of them say, outliving my savings. It is all too possible for women to do that. So we really need to enhance the benefits. It's really not that hard to pay for this stuff, right? So on the Social Security enhancements, allowing women to get that caregiver credit, get better benefits for the oldest old and the poorest poor, scrap the cap. How many of you know what the cap is? All right? Yeah. So the Social Security system is not part of the federal budget. The elected officials, including the President of the United States, repeatedly say this. They repeatedly acknowledge it, and then they keep putting Social Security back on the table for budget, as a budget thing. It's really frustrating. It's not part of the federal budget. Actually, the Social Security system is paid for with payroll taxes. So you get your paycheck, you have a payroll tax. The payroll tax goes into the Social Security system. By law, payroll taxes are not permitted to be used for any purpose other than retirement or orphans' benefits for workers who die young, their kids get the wage replacement, or disability. Workers who become disabled before they retire, they get a wage replacement. That's by law, so the payroll taxes are to be used only for those purposes. All right, but the Social Security tax is a flat tax. It's 6.2% of your salary. Every paycheck you get, 6.2% goes into the Social Security system until you reach $106,800. Right? And there's no payroll tax over $106,800. So people who are making over $106,800 are not paying any payroll tax on that. They're getting a Social Security benefit when they retire. The benefit is based on their total earnings over 35 years. Right? Now, there is a cap on the amount of benefit you get, right? But at the same time, people who are making, say, I don't know, $1 million a year, $10 million a year, $50 million a year, those folks are paying less than, well under 1% of their total income each year for Social Security. And the rest of us are paying 6%. They're paying practically 0%. So all you have to do is scrap the cap, have Social Security taxes apply to the entire amount of a person's wages, and that actually would, depending on how you calculate the benefits, you could make the system solvent for the next 75 years. Currently it's solvent for the next 23 years. You could make the system solvent for the next 75 years and, depending on how you did it, also have these benefit enhancements, right? The other thing you need to do is require the wealthiest, and I should say the corporations, to pay their fair share of taxes. In fact, Jan Schakowsky has a bill called the Fairness and Taxation Act, and it's just amazing what it does. So Under the Fairness and Taxation Act, the first $1 million that you make in a year, you get taxed the same as everybody else, 28%, whatever it is. I think it's 28%, right? From 10 to 20 million, that next 10 million to 20 million you make per year, okay? That you would pay, no, for over $1 million, 1 to 10 million, you would pay 45% of that. So you keep 55% of the 1 to 10. From 10 to 20 or 50, you would pay 46%. From 50 to 100, it's 47%. From 100 to, I don't know, a billion, it's 48%. Are you still with me here? Right? Per year, okay? And, you know, there are people who are filing their tax returns and they are reporting that much income on their tax returns, right? $1 billion and over, just that margin, $1 billion and over per year, you would pay 49%. You would keep 51% of that next billion and over. That tax structure is more generous to wealthy individuals than what Ronald Reagan campaigned for and imposed back when he was president. So lower tax rates than what Ronald Reagan had, but taxes that would, in fact, I think it's over 10 years, that would reduce the federal budget already by $700 billion. I recall that the Super Committee has been charged with lowering the deficit by $1.5 trillion. So half of it, right, with a very modest surtax on high-income individuals, and we haven't even started to talk about corporations or closing that gap of the hedge fund managers that are paying their tax rate is 15% as opposed to 28% for their secretaries. So we know what we need to do. The scary part is we don't know that Washington is going to be there and do it with us. My organization has been, sending out this message far and wide. One of the things I'm trying to do, frankly, is get our friends in the progressive community to focus on the disproportionate impact on women. If you put women at the center of your analysis and you really begin to understand what's happening to real women with these proposals and what's happening in the real economy already and the fact that women really don't have a good cushion to fall back on, then you begin, I think, to truly understand a lot more completely what it is that we need to do as a policy matter. So with that, I think I will stop. I hope I haven't talked too long. I didn't bring my watch.